Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this February 21st, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the Point of View radio talk show, the Millennial Roundtable. And we are so excited that you decided to join us today. Joining us at the roundtable, we've got Kirby Anderson here. And Kirby, how are you today?
I am good, and I'm always loving the fact that you get to sit in that chair at least once a week, and so that is great for us to hear from you.
Exceedingly kind. And then we've also got in studio today Jonathan Bodnar. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me today.
Jonathan's a millennial entrepreneur, and so he's going to bring a great perspective for us when it comes just to millennial perspectives and millennial issues. But we've got a great show for you today, but there's a couple of big things that happened just recently that really is going to kind of shock us for a little bit. Unfortunately, but also beautifully, Billy Graham is no longer with us now, and he has gone to be with the Lord. Breaking early this morning, Billy Graham passed away in his retreat in North Carolina at the age of 99, with the man, the evangelist, with the booming voice that reached over 215 million people, persuaded 3 million people. The counselor to the presidents has gone off to be with the Lord. Being just a significant life.
You know, one of the things that we all are aware of is the incredible impact that he has had. And a number of years ago, I was at a news outfit that said, you know, probably Billy Graham will pass on someday, so let's tell the stories now. I don't know if they've been able to dig up some of those interviews, but the one that I will tell is that for many years at Probe Ministries, Billy Graham organization worked with us. And what they found is that when we would go in and speak on college campuses, we would sort of stir up the dust, and there would be many more people that would come out to an open-air Billy Graham crusade. So when we were in Maryland, we went to Towson State and Johns Hopkins. When we were in California, we went to San Jose State and different places like that where we weren't even necessarily officially tied with the Graham organization, but they found that that was a very effective way to get young people to begin to think about this. Because as you and I have talked about, Nick, that was true probably decades ago. It's really true now, because a lot of your fellow millennials aren't walking around going, I wonder what Billy Graham would have to say about that, or I wonder what the Bible would have to say about that. But when you get into the classrooms, or even do outreaches on the campus or evening meetings, and you begin to raise questions, people go, yeah, that's something I'd like to know more about. And then a couple of weeks later, Billy Graham would come into town, and there would just be thousands and thousands of young people who may not have shown up simply because you were kind of creating a sense of questioning and concern and need. So that's one of the best stories we can tell about the Graham organization.
That's phenomenal. And so, again, just to stress the significance, you have one man that really started in kind of the mid-1940s, 1949, is when he really transitioned from being the street kind of street preacher to kind of the tent evangelical, I guess you could say.
That's
really
right.
To turn into a national figure, which is known as the Hearst Kiss that happened during his L.A. crusades. That Hearst was a newspaper publisher, kind of said, I want you to puff Graham.
Graham.
And when he puffed Graham, really did start to kind of generate this national figure and national persona. But, you know, Jonathan, thinking about it, just from the millennial perspective, Billy Graham was really kind of before our time. We obviously know about him, but really to be able to experience him, I don't know. What has been your experiences with Billy Graham?
I mean, kind of the same. As a millennial, we didn't get to go to much of his rallies or anything. Like, I don't know any of my friends that went, to his rallies or got to experience that. But at the end of the day, we definitely saw the effects of, his ministry and his influence. And so, I mean, growing up Baptist especially. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So we'd love to hear from you. So do you have an experience? Do you have something that you'd like to add? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and hop on over there. You can see the live video stream and then just add a comment or a like, and we'll be able to share that over air. Kirby, do you have any interesting stories, any like fun tidbits as we just continue to think about Graham just this morning and then also right now?
Sure. And one of the things I was just thinking about is that for you, you've not experienced him, but maybe you've experienced his family members. And if you ever go to Westminster Chapel and you actually see the burial for John Wesley and Charles Wesley, there's a line there. There's two quotes, and the second one is from John Wesley. God buries his workmen but continues his work. And it is a paraphrase of his old phrase, God buries his ministers and continues his ministry. And if you think about that, even though we've not had Billy Graham on this program, we've had Franklin Graham on this program, we've had Anne Graham Lotz on this program, we've had, as a matter of fact, some of his grandchildren as well. And so there's just been kind of this ongoing legacy of the Graham organization, which I think is really good because, again, Nick and Jonathan, you grew up at a time when there were some of these televangelist scandals. There have been some times when your fellow millennials have said, these people are in ministry for the money. If there's one thing about Billy Graham, I've never been to his home, but many of my friends have. It's, pretty downscale. He's always had a very significant limit on what they would receive. There has always been tremendous amount of integrity in the organization. Billy Graham and Grady Wilson both walked the aisle, become Christians. And some people said one of the reasons Billy Graham is so humble is because Grady Wilson knew Billy Graham before he was Billy Graham.
Oh, wow.
He knew, and so he could tell Billy Graham sometimes when he needed to hear something, the wounds of a friend and those kinds of things. And so there's just a lot of integrity that runs through the Graham organization. Then if you've ever been to Charlotte, North Carolina, as I have, and gone through the museum and some of that, again, you just see the emphasis upon the gospel, the emphasis upon simplicity, the emphasis on the pure word. So in some respects, the Graham organization continues on through the legacy of people like Anne Graham Lotz and Franklin Graham, and look at Samaritan's Purse and so many other things that are a legacy that was started by Billy Graham.
Yeah, Billy Graham's impact cannot be measured, but the ripples can be felt, right? His greatness wasn't in the big numbers of the 215 million, the 3 million that came to Christ because of his preaching, but really his humble posture. That's what you're alluding to. It reminds me of this quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says that there's a great man who makes every man feel small, but the real great man is the man who makes every man feel great.
Yes.
It's this sense that Billy Graham just had a way of being able to work with individuals to where they felt valued, but also they knew their value because he continually reminded individuals of their value in Christ. And it's that richness. And then just, again, I'm always just so struck, too, by this humble posture that he assumed. He was the counselor to the president.
He really was.
And so as a guy, I did my PhD research on John F. Kennedy, and so I've always just been interested in presidential history. There's been so much richness and rich little stories that have come out from this. His swimming with LBJ and the White House, in the White House pool, to kind of helping George W. Bush really kind of shore up his life and helped him stop drinking to a large degree, to being that counselor for George H.W. Bush to make sense of Christianity, even more so, and then to Bill Clinton, just being that kind of encourager to him. And then obviously we have to talk about Nixon, because there's an individual that even talks about how that Nixon moment where he felt used by Nixon really still impacted him to the very day. And so we'd love to hear from you, but we're going to have to take one of those commercial breaks. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can hop on over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that's facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Hop on over there, and then you can leave a comment or question that we'll share online. And before we leave from the break, I'm going to leave you with this quote. Someday you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead, but don't believe a word of it. I shall now be more alive than I am now, and just because I've changed my address. And we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, Steven Pinker at Harvard University says that the left and the right at least agree on one major point. The world is getting worse. His new book goes into some detail to show that simply is not true. In a recent op-ed, he reminds us that such gloominess is decidedly un-American. Unfortunately, we fool ourselves by comparing rose-tinted images of the past with the scary headlines of today. Here are just a few statistics worth considering. The homicide rate 3 decades ago is almost twice what it was today. Americans below the poverty rate today is less than a third of what it was back then. The number of wars worldwide today is half of what it was in 1988. Life expectancy has risen dramatically in the last century. Through most of human history, continuing into the 19th century, a newborn was expected to live around 30 years. Life expectancy around the world has now risen to 71, and in the developed world is at 81. As I've mentioned in previous commentaries, extreme poverty across the globe has dropped at a significant rate. In fact, Pinker predicts that the rate of extreme poverty may approach zero in our lifetimes. My major concern with his book and op-ed is his belief that all of human flourishing is due to the Enlightenment. He wrote his book to make the case for science, humanism, and progress. As I've discussed in previous commentaries, the rise of modern science came in large part from scientific pioneers who were at least theist and in most cases Christians. Likewise, arguments for free markets and private property also had a Christian component, and many of the founders of this country who gave us a republic articulated Christian principles. Some of this is lost in his attempt to credit all this good news to secular humanism. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13. Samson, now playing. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and today is February 21st, 2018, joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Jonathan Bodnar as well as Kirby Anderson. And during that first segment, we were kind of reminiscing on the passing and as well as some memories of Billy Graham, who passed away earlier this morning at the age of 99. Over 215 million people heard Graham's preaching. Over 3 million people committed their lives to Christ because of his ministry, and the world is forever changed because of what he did, as well as eternity's changed to hear good and faithful servant that he heard now. Some have considered him the Protestant Pope, and he is a counselor to the president. He's America's pastor. Many have kind of sent their condolences. Even President Trump tweeted out earlier this morning, "The great Billy Graham is dead. There was nobody like him. He will be missed by Christians and all religions. A very special man." And so we've opened up the phone lines as well as Facebook. So for you to be able to share your perception, share your point of view, maybe you have a special story that you'd like to share on air, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we're going to take one of those phone calls right now. We've got Sharon in Arizona. Sharon, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Sharon, what is your point of view?
In Arizona?
Oh, so great to hear. What's your point of view, Sharon?
I wanted to say that I am so grateful for Billy Graham personally, and my parents always got me to Mile High Stadium in Denver to see the Crusades. They always had him on TV when we were growing up. And later when I accepted Christ, I did it in my living room in Texas, watching Billy Graham on TV.
Wow.
And I'm just so grateful for the ministry and for all that they do and for all the people they've helped.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Well, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing. There's countless individuals, Kirby, that have similar testimonies to Sharon, that either went to a crusade or saw him on TV. And I think that's one of the fascinating things that Sharon kind of brought up about watching him on TV. Billy Graham really did kind of revolutionize media during his time, because, again, if we remember that he became that national figure in 1949, TV was still in the genesis stages during that time. But he really did position himself, as well as his ministry, to be able to utilize that medium in such a way to be able to spread the gospel message.
Billy Graham, Cliff Barrows, and some of the others understood that this was one event, but this event had the potential to reach many more. Even when you look at the numbers that Billy Graham actually reached, you have to recognize that the events certainly were the context for so much more, because you had worldwide pictures, you had all those films, you had, of course, television. Many more of us saw Billy Graham on television than ever saw him face-to-face in the stadiums, and so as a result, that was another kind of genius of recognizing that this is a new technology. I mean, television had been around, but realistically, as more and more people were getting television sets in the 1950s, he began to realize this would be an opportunity to reach many more people for Christ. And so that's another aspect, if you will, a legacy of the Graham organization, recognizing that first with television, then with the internet and social media. This next week, there'll be the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and some of the people that have been part of that in the past were part of the Graham organization, talking about how you could use all these various technologies to reach people for Christ. So Sharon is a representation of many other people that I've run into, some of whom became Christians because of Billy Graham and then have served on his board. So you even see that kind of legacy as well. So just all sorts of stories we can tell as we go through the day about Billy Graham.
And Jonathan, that's something that you can appreciate too, because you find yourself right there on the precipice of where technology is now, and really trying to take advantage of that in a way that might be conducive to the extension of the kingdom of God. And so that really is, you can speak on that, right?
Definitely. I think it's interesting that Billy Graham and the ministry of Billy Graham took advantage of that media so early on, whereas we see a lot of, church organizations and ministries and everything kind of a little slower to adopt, newer technologies nowadays. And so I think it's incredible that they saw that potential so early on. And, like you said, the genesis of, media, the genesis of television and everything.
Yeah, not only the genesis of television, of not necessarily on the forefront of radio, but really utilized radio, but it's satellite television. And now, and even more so, kind of one of his still lasting legacies outside of just his words is Christianity Today.
That's certainly the case, because he was one of the individuals. Boy, you've done your research. This is great because those of us that are older know some of these stories, but basically getting Carl Henry and Billy Graham really together creating what today is the Christianity Today magazine. Then, of course, you have the Graham Centers and all the legacy there as well. And one more I might just mention real quickly, and that is the ability to understand how to communicate these ideas to a secular press. That was a real challenge. Now, the press didn't used to be as hostile towards Christianity, I'll say to you two younger guys, in the 50s and 60s. But even then, there were those looking for the scandals. And so this is why, again, you have the Graham rules. That is a set salary, a board that oversees that, never being in a room with a woman without the door open or without someone else there. All the kind of rules that they implemented to prevent that. And here's a great illustration. A good friend of mine is Peggy Waymeyer. When she was at that time the ABC religion reporter, they had a press conference with Billy Graham. And she had seen these people making all sorts of disparaging comments about Christians. And, of course, when you've had a televangelist scandal and a lot of these people have never been in a church or a synagogue in their life, they're all just really very skeptical. But when Dr. Graham walks in the room, you would think that it was a parochial school. Everybody sits up straight. Everybody was very nice because just of the kind of aura that was surrounding an individual. Jim Dennison wrote in the piece that came out just a while ago that he'd never been around somebody who gave him a more sense of holiness. And there was a sense that even the non-Christian, skeptical, jaded, secular reporters began to sit up a little more straight, didn't have the kind of comments, didn't ask the kinds of questions that oftentimes they would, because they recognized they were dealing with a person of great integrity.
And it kind of very reminiscent of Acts 4, right? And they recognized he had been with Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that Graham was just that type of individual. And Jonathan, increasingly in a world, especially from a millennial perspective, it really is an us versus them culture, it seems like right now. There's that dichotomy between Christians and between whether it's the media, whether it's the world, whether it's the culture, what have you. There very is much that battle that seems like it. And Graham really did model for us a way to be able to find those avenues whereby we can agree and then find places where we can move from our areas of agreement in order to tackle the issues of the day, right?
I think the only way you're able to kind of separate that divide or bridge that divide, rather, is through that amount of integrity and through that amount of just the lifestyle that you live. And, I think the issue, the reason that we can't bridge a lot of political divides right now is that there's such a lack of integrity. There's such a lack of standard. And so I think that creates a divide. And so I think that's, a huge part of why Billy Graham was able to do that.
He not only transcended that kind of the sacred and the secular, if we made that dichotomy, but also just between denominations as well, was just able to speak. So we're going to continue taking your phone calls, and so you can call in 800-351-1212. We're going to jump over to Catherine in Texas right now. Catherine, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Catherine, what is your point of view?
Hi. Back in the 50s, I guess I was maybe 10, 11 years old, there was our favorite clothing store that the girls went to, and someone had left a track in there in the dressing room pinned up about girls dressing modestly and the temptations that they can cause young men to have without even knowing it, just because they're keeping up with the styles. And that touched me so much. I mean, the way he worded it, of course, I'm not going to be able to say it exactly how he said it, but he knew how to reach people. And that was like from a 10, 11-year-old. And I still remember it. It was the first thought that came to my mind when I heard that he had gone to be with the Lord, was like, that track. That track was so awesome. And we're going to miss him, and we love him, and he's with the Lord.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that word. Kirby, it's just a reminder that the gospel message is offensive enough. And so what we want to do is try to make it as palatable as possible by our kind gestures, right?
Billy Graham, Steps to Peace with God, you can think of Just As I Am, which was one of his books, but of course that's one of the songs that they sing. One on angels, a bestseller, and a number of others. So the written word was another way in which the Graham organization really were able to influence people. And Catherine reminds us of one of the tracks that came out from the Graham organization.
That's phenomenal. So we're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue taking some of your phone calls and some of your comments on Facebook. But we're going to have to take one of those breaks. So if you want to call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Leave a comment or a message on the page, and then we'll be sure to share it online. And we'll be back right after this.
From PureFlix comes Samson, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, from his anointing to betrayal to redemption.
My name is Samson, and you will face the wrath of God.
Samson, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at samson.movie.
Missing a day of Point of View is like Samson losing his hair. Now stay with me. Without his hair, Samson was weak, and ultimately he lost his sight. Without Point of View, you miss out on encouraging news, stories of how God is using Christians to make a difference. Instead of being strengthened, you get discouraged. And Point of View helps you see places to get involved, opportunities to apply your God-given gifts for good. Never miss a program, a Viewpoint's commentary, an important action item when you download the Point of View radio app, free from Google Play or iTunes. Take out your phone right now and download the Point of View radio app. See the difference you can make.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, your host for the Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable today. And we joining us in studio, Point of View, we've got Kirby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar, who is a kind of a millennial expert and also a social, just an entrepreneur as well with web-based companies. And so we are so excited you decided to join us today. And we have been talking about the legacy of Billy Graham and been taking your phone calls as well. And so we've been individuals have been everyone from Sharon to Catherine have been sharing stories about how Billy Graham and his ministry has touched them, has awakened them to the glorious majesty of Christ our King. And it's just been fascinating. And so, Kirby, I just want to continue to go back to this. You know, it's really astounding for me as a millennial to think there was once a time that an individual could come into town and for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, just host a series of meetings and thousands of people would come. Like, that just seems, I can understand once during that time, but for a series, these crusades just seem like a different planet when you talk about it.
And they really are in some respects, because you can all the way go back to the first Great Awakening, and you have a number of individuals, and one in particular by the name of Whitefield, who, in a sense, developed this idea of open-air crusades and also developed an ability to promote those, even through his own friend, Benjamin Franklin, and we're not sure whether or not he ever committed his life to the Lord. But nevertheless, that was an interesting pairing of Franklin and Whitefield. And if you were to go to a Billy Graham crusade, a lot of it was like what was happening in the 18th century, where they would gather together. It was an open air. Now, you used to have tent meetings. And again, you can imagine, even during the Second Great Awakening, during the revivalists and those kinds of things, that people would come out to these. Billy Graham figured out a way to move from a tent meeting, because that's where he got started. Matter of fact, the one in Los Angeles you're talking about, where you have, again, William Randolph Hearst as Puff Graham. That was just under a tent. But then came to this idea of having it in an open-air stadium. And that's where they began to understand the value of, dare I use the word, marketing, promotion, getting all the churches together. You mentioned cross denominations. Billy Graham for a while was criticized because he worked also with Catholics as well as Protestants. And he would meet with ministers, and the ministers would invite him in, or he would meet with them and say, we want to have this crusade and bring these people out. And this was an opportunity for them to grow in your churches. Well, you might think that the idea of an open-air crusade is dead. Then you have to look at one of the people that sits on his board, who actually has been doing a number of these crusades over these years. And so, again, Greg Laurie has kept this going. And so this is the idea of sort of an open-air kind of platform evangelism crusade. Now, it is amazing to me in this 21st century that Greg Laurie has been able to keep it going the way Billy Graham did. But again, they recognize the value of the Internet. When Greg Laurie was here last time, even though I was sitting on one of the boards, my wife doesn't do well around all the electronics there at the Cowboy Stadium. So we watched it online, and we were one of millions of people that had a chance to see this. So it's gone from just having an impact in a local community to having an impact in the United States to now, because of the Internet, having an impact around the world. And so these events are helpful in the fact that there are individuals that walk the aisle and come forward, but many more people electronically are coming to know the Lord because of that. So the event creates the electronic opportunity for everybody to come together for a single event.
Wow, that's phenomenal. So if you have a comment or question, or maybe you have a story you'd like to share about your experience with Billy Graham, you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212, or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and share that as well, and we'll share that over air. We're going to hop on over to South Carolina. We've got Hugh on the line. Hugh, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Hugh, what's your point of view?
Thanks for taking my call. Growing up in the 50s and the 60s, I was, I'll use the word exposed, or introduced to Billy Graham by television. I've fortunately been able to attend only one of his crusades, but being a missionary now with Cadence International, ministry to the military around the world, and being here at the Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, I've had opportunities to both visit the Cove multiple times and then also to on retreats that I conduct for the airmen to include in our retreats and so forth stops at the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte. And I never have been able to be at either of those places and seeing all that God has accomplished through the team, obviously through Billy Graham, but he obviously did not want to be alone and stand alone. He wanted the team, and it gives the team credit, ultimately gives God the credit. And I cannot visit those places without a great deal of emotion, just seeing God's work and how God uses people who are committed to him. And just this last weekend, team retreat up in North Carolina, which I included in those retreats, visiting Samaritan's Purse, headquartered there in Boone. And I recognize that's, I guess you could say, a derivative of the Billy Graham ministry, with Franklin Graham as the head of that. And it is it's amazing to me how many of the millennial group haven't even heard of Billy Graham or Samaritan's Purse or those related ministries. But just such an amazing thing what God has done and what God can do for those who are fully committed to him. The eyes of the Lord, the to and fro throughout the earth, that he might, not familiar, I just lost my memory, but use those, seeking those, blessing those who are fully committed to him. And I just give God thanks. And with a tinge of sadness, not for him, but for us and our loss.
Yeah, amen. Hugh brings up a great point in the fact that God really did use Billy Graham, and it wasn't because Billy Graham was perfect. Now we've gone to great lengths to be able to show the lengths that Billy Graham went in order to maintain purity, to pursue after holiness. There was the Modest Manifesto that kind of came out that talked about just kind of some of the protocols that he would have relative to his interactions with individuals, so that he might maintain and be above reproach and that godliness. But it's also well known, just kind of some of the questions and some of the comments that he made in the Nixon White House. I was fascinated by this one comment, Kirby, by William, I think it's William Martin, who is a professor.
And I've spoken in his class at Rice.
Yeah,
yes.
And so William Martin is probably the leading Billy Graham, almost expert. He's just been given unprecedented access to Billy Graham. And still, whenever Billy Graham would talk to William about the series of events that happened at Watergate and during the Nixon administration, it really was just a sense that there's a great article on the Gospel Coalition that talks about even when Martin was speaking about this, how he still seemed as though that was the most profound and most hurt he had been because of what how the Nixon administration had used him, but also how some of the words that came out. But again, one of the beautiful things about Billy Graham was it wasn't that he was shunning responsibility of it. He owned up to his mistakes and asked for forgiveness, which is just pristine of his own character.
And again, this is one of the concerns that many people have had about him or anyone else. You know, right now we have the evangelical group that are actually dealing with and providing counsel to President Trump. And that is, how close do you get and how much do you affirm or speak truth to power in the midst of that? And the Nixon years, probably the greatest concern and hurt on the part of Billy Graham, for a couple of reasons. Number one, he thought that Richard Nixon was being honest with him when it was very obvious, as we found out later from Watergate, he was not. Number two, Billy Graham was even more embarrassed years later when they found some of the audio clips. And there was a place where Richard Nixon had said some pretty awful things, and since it's Christian radio, I won't even go into it, but you can imagine awful things, and you hear Billy Graham go, because he was only maybe half paying attention. And so then he was on record of looking like he was endorsing something he obviously did not. And so this is going to always be a problem for anybody who wants to be a pastor for a person in political office, whether it's a pastor to the governor of the state, a pastor to a representative, or in this case, the pastor to the presidents. And you have seen all the pictures going from Harry Truman all the way up to Barack Obama, where at one point or another, they've all had a chance to spend time with Billy Graham. But there was a lot of time that Billy Graham was in the Nixon White House, which, of course, ended in tremendous scandal.
And so we are going to continue taking your phone calls. We've got a couple of others, but we've got a commercial break right now that we're going to have to get to, so I don't want to cut someone off And so just to be aware that you can call in to Point of View at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212, or you can go on Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. Again, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. And when you go to the Facebook page, there's going to be the live feed that's going on. You can click on comment, add your comment, and we'll share that over air when we get back after the break. But before we leave the break, I'm going to again share this quote with you that Billy Graham said while he was still living, that I think is just so pertinent, especially today on this day that he has been reported that Billy Graham has passed away into eternity. And so it says, quote, "Someday you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. I shall be more alive than I am now. I will just have changed my address. I've gone into the presence of God." And we'll be right back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On our last episode, we discussed the religious test clause found in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Today, I'd like to discuss the clause just before it, the Oaths Clause. In practical terms, the Oaths Clause required federal officials to be bound to their office with an oath or affirmation that they would support the Constitution. Most immediately, that language came in stark contrast to the oath the new Americans once swore to England's king. No longer would Americans swear allegiance to a single human. Rather, their duty in office would be in service and support of the Constitution and, by extension, to the "we the people" mentioned in its preamble. You probably understand the part about oaths, but why did the framers insert the "or affirmation" part? Well, the answer reveals our country's commitment to recognizing that its government should neither compel nor compromise the religious conscience of its citizens. Some religious beliefs prevent the taking of oaths of any kind, save an oath to God alone. It may seem insignificant upon first glance, but by inserting the word "or" in the Oaths Clause and giving the option to affirm support of the Constitution, the framers made the official policy of the United States that it would show deference to the religious conscience of its citizens. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Jonathan Bodnar as well as Kirby Anderson. And we have been talking about the legacy, the life of Billy Graham, who passed away earlier this morning at the age of 99, preaching to up to 215 million people, 3 million people converting to Christ underneath his ministry. His impact will still be measured into eternity because the words that he sowed never returned void. But we've been taking some of your questions and comments that you've been calling in as well as on Facebook. And so we're going to jump on over to Illinois right now. We've got Louis on the line. Louis, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Hey.
Praise the Lord.
Hey, Louis. What's your point of view?
About the death of Billy Graham. He was one of the greatest preachers of the 20th century. He left us with a legacy that is the non-void. Billy Graham passed away. He died at the age of 99. We need to be in prayer for the Billy Graham family.
Very good.
And it saddens me. His ministry will continue.
Yeah. Yeah, Louis, I think that you bring up a really great point in the sense that yes, we have lost someone, but there's a family that's lost a dad, a grandfather, an uncle that really has lost someone significantly.
That is. And so, again, pray for the family, pray for the funeral. And I do wonder how the world is going to react to this. I hope better than when, say, Jerry Falwell died and some of that. I'm hoping we're not going to get a lot of snarky comments, but if nothing else, there will probably be some. And that's another reason to pray for the family, not only the loss, but sometimes it's hard to hear something negative said about your father or your grandfather. So I would certainly encourage you to pray for the families as well.
That is for sure. And so we're going to continue taking phone calls. We've got Michael right now. Michael, are you there?
Hey, hello.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
What's your point of view?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. And I want to say, Kirby, that my wife and I, we support you through the PCA Foundation. But yes, I want to say that as Christians, we grieve differently than those without Christ. So we've lost a few in the past. We lost R.C. Sproul recently and Billy Graham. But can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yes. What I was going to say is, on another side, for fun, back, I believe, in the 50s, there was a television show called What's My Line, with a panel of wore blinders.
Yes.
And they would ask questions of the guests. Well, one of the guests was Billy Graham. And that was pretty cool, I thought.
And these millennials have no idea what we're talking about. But those of us a little bit older, sometimes they bring on people and they weren't blindfolded because they wouldn't know who they were. And so they would ask all sorts of questions. And in this case, what this would sometimes when they'd have a Muhammad Ali on or a Billy Graham or whoever it might be, then they would change their voice and they would be blindfolded. And then they were given a number of questions to try to figure out whether or not they guessed who this individual was. Oftentimes they were pretty good at guessing, even if they were blindfolded. But that was one of those shows that, again, illustrates the willingness of Billy Graham to understand that he didn't always have to be a man of the cloth. He could be a more popular individual. He would be somebody who would be willing to make fun of himself or go on a program or do some interviews that up until that time you didn't really necessarily see people doing. And we see this today, even more so. We see these presidential candidates going on some of these late-night shows. Well, the person that kind of started some of that was Billy Graham, if you really want to be honest about it.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so we're going around the round table right now. I've got a question for all of us. And, Jonathan, I'm going to go with you first off. And so as you're reflecting back on the life of Billy Graham, the characteristics, the features, kind of the accentuating highlights of his life, what is that characteristic? What is the lesson we can learn from Billy Graham that needs to be applied in today's society?
Oh, boy. Well, it's hard to pick just one. I definitely think one of the most powerful positions of Billy Graham, one of the most powerful messages that he gave was post-Lyndon B. Johnson. He declined to endorse, either political party, and he remained mostly unbiased, I suppose. And, for Billy Graham, politics came second to the gospel, and that was important. You listen to any of his messages, and in every single preaching he does, in every single, crusade he did, his number one message was Jesus loves you. And so, I think that's just so powerful, just keeping it simple.
Yeah, keep the main thing the main thing.
Exactly.
And so what Billy Graham did so well, and you're so right, it's not necessarily get swayed by the power, but really just kind of reminds me of Isaiah. So Isaiah had what many would consider just an awful ministry. He got to go into positions of power, but inevitably he got rejected the entire time of his ministry. And God, knowing that he would get rejected, God knowing that he would put him in positions where he would minister to these kings, at the very beginning of his ministry, gave him this glorious vision in Isaiah 6 that we all gravitate towards, of being able to see the train of the robe fill the temple courts, and Isaiah being able to say, here I am, I'm a man of very unclean lips. and how God was really training him and equipping him in that moment to be able to say, you're going to go into these other individuals of great power, but know that you have had an experience with the King of Kings that would humble him to the extent that he could finish the race well run. And so, Kirby, okay, same question to you. You're thinking about Billy Graham's ministry, characteristics, features. What's something that needs to be applied to today?
One of the people sitting in this very chair I'm sitting in right now is Greg Laurie. I mentioned just a minute ago. And Greg Laurie, since he's been on the board with Billy Graham all these years, asked him one time, if you, as the older Billy Graham, could talk to the younger Billy Graham, what advice would you give to him? And without missing a beat, Billy Graham said, I'd spend more time speaking about the cross. And even though he was critical of the fact that he never emphasized the cross, really, Billy Graham, from start to finish, emphasized the cross. If you go to the museum, Hugh was mentioning that just a minute ago, there are multiple times you see a cross. There's one point where you actually walk through a cross that opens up. So this is, I think, one of the legacies that he's left, the pure, unadulterated gospel that focuses on the cross. What did Jesus do on the cross? Why was it important? You cannot find a Billy Graham sermon without him talking about the fact that all of sin falls short of the glory of God, that we all are level, and that ground in front of the cross, all of us need a Savior. And that was certainly his legacy and one of the things that he will be best known for in the history books that will be written in the future.
Well, that's phenomenal. Okay, so we're going to take one quick phone call. We've got Nell in Texas. Nell, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, Nell, what is your point of view?
I lived in Salzburg, Austria, and Billy Graham spoke in Stuttgart, Germany, which is a few hours from there. I believe it was his first campaign in Germany in 1954, and in a big stadium there. And it was such a thrill for us to hear him because we had heard about all of his ministry in California, you know. Then in the year 1970, the Evangelical Alliance in Western Europe organized what was then known as Euro 70, a satellite hookup with major cities nearly all over Western Europe. He spoke in Germany, and this was carried throughout Western Europe. And I was on that committee in Salzburg, Austria, so that was, people got saved, and I think of one young girl who got saved, and I trained in children's ministry after that. And after that, this effort has continued. It is now called Pro-Christ.
That's
P-R-O, Christ, for Christ.
That's so great, Nell. Well, thank you so much. We're going to have to jump off for a commercial break, but as we continue on, we're going to jump back into Billy Graham as well as some of the things that are happening in Parkland as well as in Syria, and we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.
You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View for this second hour of the show. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined on this Wednesday edition of Point of View by Kirby Anderson in studio, as well as Jonathan Bodnar in studio here for this Wednesday edition of Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable. This is being the second hour. During the first hour, we talked about the passing of Billy Graham, the legacy of just a great evangelical leader, a counselor to the president, Protestant Pope, American pastor, reaching his message and ministry, reaching over 215 million people, leading to the conversion of 3 million people to the cause of Christ, and continues to send ripples forth. And so we were shocked by his passing this morning, but we are not surprised nor are about where he is today, that he is fully known and he is fully alive at the right hand of Jesus now. And so we've been talking about that during the first hour. We're taking some of your phone calls. And here in the second hour, we're going to be talking a little bit about President Trump and his move to, is he banning bump stocks with guns? Is he regulating these bump stocks? Would Jesus own a gun? What are we to think about all of this? And so we'll be talking about that, as well as some of the situation that's going on in Syria. And then also, we've got, since it's Millennial Wednesdays, we're going to be talking about the crisis relative to millennials making less money. And so all those articles and more you can find on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. Again, pointofview.net. You'll be able to find some of those articles on the website, as well as we'll be taking some of your phone calls during this next hour at 800-351-1212, or you can hop over on the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But without further ado, let's jump into guns, shall we, Kirby? Let's hope figuratively jump into guns, not literally jump into guns. That would not be safe whatsoever. Well, on Tuesday, President Donald Trump said that he's directed his Attorney General to propose changes that would ban bump fire stocks, which make it easier for rounds to shoot more quickly. This move adds his voice to a process that really began in December, but really started. We got intimately acquainted with it in a tragic situation relative to what happened in Las Vegas, where over 58 people ended up losing their lives because an individual shot up a country concert, leaving almost 50, I think it's 58 people dead and hundreds injured because of that. And Kirby, this is a bold move for a president that really has kind of solidified himself around an NRA base, right?
Well, and again, this is an individual that maybe wasn't necessarily the darling of the NRA a couple of years ago. So let's put that in perspective. And I've heard a number of people say he is probably on some of these issues on Second Amendment, probably going to propose some things that maybe not everybody's going to like. Let's get to the one in particular, because that is, I guess it's the third article if you've posted here today on bump stocks. You know, as probably the only person around the table that owns a gun and has actually shot one and those kinds of things, I'd never heard about it. And I've talked to people that said, I don't even know what a bump stock is. So the bottom line is that this is not going to affect any individual. What it does is it's something you add to the part that hits your shoulder, and it allows it to sort of be like an automatic weapon where it fires simultaneously. There are other things you can do inside the gun itself, change the shear and things like that to actually, what's called the sear, change that in such a way that it will shoot. But again, I don't think you're going to have much pushback either with a regulation of bump stocks or a banning of it, because that's not something that anybody who is concerned with protection of their family, hunting, sports is ever really that interested in. So, and even if you regulate it, let's face it, with these 3D printers, I think you could probably make one if you really wanted to do so. But if that makes people who are concerned and saying we have to do something feel a little bit better, knock yourself out. I don't think even the NRA is going to go against this particular issue because it's just not a big issue for most people that own guns today.
Yeah, and Jonathan brings up a great point just because there's been such a rallying cry, especially around what's happened at Parkland, right? So Parkland being the latest tragedy that happened with the school shooting, that 17 people have lost their lives because of this. And there wasn't a bump stock used, but all too often, whenever there's a tragedy that happens relative to a mass shooting, we're following a very traditional pattern where the tragedy happens and then there's the call to be able to ban weapons, to start regulating stronger background checks, et cetera, et cetera. And so is this really just a reaction out of that? Again, we need to do something because of this is just happening all too frequently.
Yeah. So, if you watched on Fox or CNN, they were earlier today, they were airing the student press conference that happened there in Florida today. And, the kids had a lot of outcries and they were very, very, obviously impassioned and upset about a lot of it. And they specifically cited, this being Donald Trump's responsibility and, it's the responsibility of the president and it's his job and, all of this. And, I think it's a tricky question because I think there's so many more factors than just bump stocks or guns in general. And, it kind of hits home a lot for myself because my wife is a teacher and, I have a lot of family members, a lot of friends that are teachers and everything. And so there's just so much more to the conversation than just bump stocks. But I personally think, just in regards to this article, I think that him banning bump stocks is more of a message than, trying to actually fix anything because it's more of a, hey, I'm listening, like I'm here, I'm going to do something about it, versus, hey, let's fix the whole solution. Because bump stocks, like Kirby said, you can 3D print them. You can 3D print guns. I have a business partner that, does just that. And so it's, I don't know, it's a very small piece of it.
It's fascinating just because what's differentiating Parkland and the tragedy that happened in Parkland from others is we are seeing a student uprising unlike any other right now, Kirby. I mean, you go on social media and you have these individuals that have bust them into Tallahassee. They are so well organized, so well articulate relative to these issues. And they're really just sick of all these tragedies that are happening because many of these millennials have been, all they've known is mass shooting. Yeah. Because the 13 of the 20 largest shootings have happened in their lives. And so there's just an angst about something needs to be done.
And this is where you have the contrast of two statistics which are easy to verify. Number one, your likelihood of being involved in a violent crime has dropped precipitously over the last couple of decades. But the number of these mass shootings have gone through the roof. So on the one hand, going out on the street, now I'm not saying that it's been safe in Chicago or South Central LA or something like that, but in a lot of places, violent crime has dropped very significantly over the last couple of decades, but these shootings have not. And so that's the first issue. Number two, of course, there are lots of voices, student voices speaking out right now. I think some of that is organized by those other than students. We can leave that for Ben Shapiro and Dinesh D'Souza to address in just a minute, because I'm sure we'll talk about that. But at the same time, there is a sense of frustration, so we need to do something. So let's start thinking smart as well as hard. And when we come back from the break, there are people that have actually come up with some reasonable changes, maybe, for example, in the National Instant Criminal Background Check or in various things that really would save some lives. David French even suggested if we were to just make some of these changes, we would have perhaps prevented 4 of the last 4 major mass shootings over the last 4 years. So there are some things that can be done, but bump stock's not going to be one of them.
Yeah, and so when we come back, we're going to talk more about the reaction and then some of our actions that we can do. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, Steven Pinker at Harvard University says that the left and the right at least agree on one major point. The world is getting worse. His new book goes into some detail to show that simply is not true. In a recent op-ed, he reminds us that such gloominess is decidedly un-American. Unfortunately, we fool ourselves by comparing rose-tinted images of the past with the scary headlines of today. Here are just a few statistics worth considering. The homicide rate 3 decades ago is almost twice what it was today. Americans below the poverty rate today is less than a third of what it was back then. The number of wars worldwide today is half of what it was in 1988. Life expectancy has risen dramatically in the last century. Through most of human history, continuing into the 19th century, a newborn was expected to live around 30 years. Life expectancy around the world has now risen to 71, and in the developed world is at 81. As I've mentioned in previous commentaries, extreme poverty across the globe has dropped at a significant rate. In fact, Pinker predicts that the rate of extreme poverty may approach zero in our lifetimes. My major concern with his book and op-ed is his belief that all of human flourishing is due to the Enlightenment. He wrote his book to make the case for science, humanism, and progress. As I've discussed in previous commentaries, the rise of modern science came in large part from scientific pioneers who were at least theists and in most cases Christians. Likewise, arguments for free markets and private property also had a Christian component, and many of the founders of this country who gave us a republic articulated Christian principles. Some of this is lost in his attempt to credit all this good news to secular humanism. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13. Samson now playing. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, hosting today's Millennial Roundtable on this Point of View radio talk show. And then we've also got Kirby Anderson that's joining us at the roundtable, as well as Jonathan Bodnar. We were talking about the reaction from the Parkland shooting that happened just this time last week, and what's kind of some of the reactions. And one of those reactions would be that President Trump now ordered yesterday that his Attorney General begin to formulate an idea to be able to regulate some of these bump stocks. But what's been interesting is just also some of the reactions for other individuals as well. Specifically, the students are organizing in a way that unlike anything that I've ever seen before, Kirby.
Well, and again, they went to Tallahassee, Florida, and some of our listeners live in Florida, and saw that the vote was turned down to ban assault weapons. Even if you did that in the state of Texas, I don't think it would have much impact. But again, I don't think they're going to be discouraged, because now they want to go to Washington, D.C., and I think one of the places where they should protest, of course, they're going to protest in front of the White House if Donald Trump can do that much. I think one place to protest might be the FBI. Have we dropped the ball on a few of these cases? I think most people, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, are saying, this one, we had 39 different visits to the home. We had 2 verifiable, actionable items. And, well, what can we do? And that brings me to the David French argument, because in some states, let's use our listeners in California, you have what's known as a gun violence restraining order. And that is, if you are a parent or a spouse or a brother or a sister or a concerned individual, you can go to court and you can get at least a restraining order to temporarily remove those guns. Now, I understand how important that is, because both in my extended family and my closer family, there have been times when I said, need to make sure that all the guns are in the gun safe, and that nobody knows the combination but me. And if I ever get too crazy, they'll take the combination away from me. And so we do that already in some respects, but this would be a way to do so. And David French argues that if you actually look at this a particular power that could be given to individuals, he says this might have stopped at least 4 of the mass shootings in the last 4 years. Would it stop all of them? No. But it shows that we are dealing with sometimes people who need to be reported. And I'll add one more. This change in the National Instant Criminal Background Check. In a couple of cases, let's just take the shooter here in the state of Texas. You have that at Sutherland Springs, Texas. If the Air Force had reported some of that information, he may not have been able to obtain weapons. Might not have, might have. But there are some very important concrete things that can be done that do not take away our Second Amendment rights, but do have the possibility of bringing about some remarkable changes and maybe the limitation of these kind of mass shootings.
Yeah, and so, Jonathan, you were talking about that during the break as well, or maybe it was on air, talking about how this is just one part of the problem. There's a multitude of factors that are leading these individuals to be able to do these heinous and atrocious acts. And so it's not simply just trying to get rid of people's guns, because we live in the U.S. and that's one of our rights that we have. It's not a privilege. I think it's important to make that delineation. It's a right that we have. And so how do we move forward in such a way that honors our past, but also keeps us safe in the present and onward into the future?
Definitely. I think it is a very small piece. Gun control, in quotations, is a very small piece of the puzzle. My wife and I, like I mentioned, my wife is a teacher, and we talked a lot about we just brainstormed just together all the different things that you can be doing inside of schools right now without even government. I mean, we hear so often, oh, it's the president's job, it's Trump's job, it's it's legislation, it's the House that needs to pass something. But at the end of the day, it's like, how much money goes to sports systems? Like our sports, all of the programs, in the schools. Like, I know the school I went to, there was so much money, millions and millions and millions of dollars poured into that. How much extra is it to get an extra security guard? This school had one security guard for 3,000 students. How hard is it to have one entry and exit point in the school? Those are powerful, simple ways, and there's so many more. Like, even Kirby was mentioning there's so many different ways that we can kind of curve this without just focusing on the gun, and without let's look at the home life. I mean, there's in Florida, I don't remember what the act is, but there is a law where you can actually detain someone or send them into a mental institute for 24 to 48 hours if you suspect something like this has happened. And so it's like there's so many more precursors that you can do before something like this happens.
I think it illuminates something, that there is the gun piece, and I think that here's where I don't want to see us throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think there is a commonality, and guns is I know that's an obvious thing, but guns is a commonality, and I think we're all getting on board. Quinnipiac just released that new poll that said that 97% of Americans favor a stronger background check, and even President Trump mentioned that in his tweet today, that we might be able to figure out, okay, but the background check, like Kirby said, is only as good as if you report it to the authorities that can do something about it, right? Relative to the Air Force or relative to this. So we've got to understand that there are measures that the government can take in order to protect us. But we also have to understand that it's more than just a government thing, especially from a conservative perspective. It's more than simply just the government over-regulating in this particular instance, but understanding there's intermediary factors that are necessary for us to address, right, Kirby?
And that's one of the things that, as we talk about those factors, let's recognize that there probably will be a bigger push towards gun control than ever before. You probably, like I, read David Leonhardt, who's in the New York Times, and he pointed out something the other day, that the number of people that own guns has gone from about 50% to a little higher than 30%. So that means, and here's another good millennial, I think the younger you are, the less likely you are to own a gun. And so in some respects, if the teenagers here from this school and other millennials say, I don't own a gun, I don't know anybody that owns a gun, so let's just ban these guns, that might actually push forward. But there are a variety of other issues that millennials can address as well. How about video games for just a minute? Watching lots and lots of violent movies, participating in shoot-'em-up video games, does that have any kind of impact? Well, of course it does. We've talked with Dr. David Grossman about these kinds of issues, and Surgeon Generals have, over the years, pointed out some of those dangers. Mental health, we've talked about that in the past as well. And so those are all really important questions. And then back to even to the security guard. We've had John Lott on this program a number of times, and he points out that as important as a security guard is, they're the first person shot usually. So his argument is that as important as it might be to have a security guard at a high school, it would be even better to have a sign up there saying some of our teachers are armed. Whether they are or not almost is immaterial, because just think about this in terms of airplanes. When we started seeing airplanes hijacked, what did we do? Well, we said that we have an air marshal there. Yeah, but do we know he's on there? No, because he or she just looks like any other passenger. We allowed some of the pilots to have a gun. Is he carrying or not? It's hard to tell. All the hijackings went down because deterrence works. If you just knew that in most of the schools in America, there could be a teacher or two, not just a security guard, that's carrying a gun concealed, is that going to maybe cause you to rethink whether or not you want to act out in that particular environment? I think we know what the answer is.
And I think you're bringing up a great point, and I want to continue to say that individuals can call in as well as share their comment at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212, or you can jump over on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. But I think one of the interesting things, Kirby, that you bring up, and one of the things that we can talk about after the break, is what David Brooks kind of offered of just not only just some of the systemic things that we can be doing, but also the interpersonal things.
Right.
And I'm captivated by this idea of demonsterizing the other side, because we've become so polarized on this issue that guns has become sacred on both sides of the aisle. So we've become so polarized to the extent that we have individuals that are worshiping their guns, which is not good, and individuals that want to completely eradicate guns, which is not feasible. And so, I mean, literally,
how do you have any kind of civil discussion?
You can.
And can we talk about Ben Shapiro and Dinesh D'Souza? Can we talk about that after the
Oh,
break?
my goodness.
I think there's a time when we actually have to call out some of the people that have been on this program for not showing civility, don't you think?
I completely agree.
Okay.
And so some of the comments that Dinesh D'Souza has made, as well as Ben Shapiro, are just very unbecoming, especially from conservative perspective that values prudence and respect as highly as William Buckley and Edmund Burke did. But nevertheless, we're going to get to that. But also, I'm captivated by David Brooks and his argument of being able to demonsterize the other person, to understand the caricatures that one side offers the other do nothing but hinder communication. And so what would it look like if we demonsterize individuals to be able to have a conversation with them to such an extent that we completely eradicate these negative stereotypes? And in the complete eradication of negative stereotypes, we earn trust. And then from earning trust, we begin to make changes necessary to be able to create a more prosperous and healthy society. We'd love to hear from you, because I promise we're not going to monsterize you. You can call in at 800-351-1212, and there's some of you that are calling in now. 800-351-1212. Jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio, and we'll be back right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Kirby Anderson as well as Jonathan Bodnar here in studio. And we have been talking about guns. And in a shocking twist, individuals are calling in because they'd like to share their point of view. It's been one of the fascinating things that's happened. So a quick update. Last week, we had the tragedy that happened in Parkland, Florida. And then just yesterday, President Trump decided that he wanted to start working with regulations with the Attorney General to be able to ban or to further regulate bump stocks. And then it's caused us to try to question and try to understand what is a natural reaction to this? Is this really a gun issue? Is this a mental health issue? Is this a social science, kind of a silence issue? What is it? And so we have been opening up the phone lines, and so we're going to go ahead and jump on one of these phone calls. And so we've got Carolyn in Illinois. Carolyn, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Carolyn, what is your point of view?
My point here in Illinois, I know that most of the mental institutions, even if a young man or young woman were to reach out and need help, most of our facilities are closed. There's limited access to getting these help, and number one. Number two is something as simple, I think, as a metal detector would be fabulous, and most schools have one main entrance. Let the kids come in there, teachers, everybody. It's going to stop things going into the school that shouldn't be brought into the school. The guns aren't going to get in, knives aren't going to get in, ammunition are not going to get in. And I think, all this talk about, guns are going to be forever on the streets. They just are. We have a lot of guns on our streets that are illegal. But I think to stop them from going into the schools by having a metal detector would be awesome.
Yeah, Carolyn, that's a great point.
Some schools in Illinois do that, but they tend to be more the urban schools. And again, the question would be, would we be willing to go along with that? We've kind of accepted metal detectors before we get on an airplane. And the only reason I think some schools don't is then it sends a signal that, well, this could be dangerous. I just don't think there's that much intrusion into your personal privacy to have a metal detector. All the kids walk through a metal detector. They walk by various detectors to determine whether or not they stole something from, a particular department store or something like that. And it would pick up, unfortunately, some things that are metallic, but it would not only pick up guns, it'd pick up knives and a variety of other things. And I think young people would think very quickly before they would bring any of those into the rooms, and very quickly you'd have, again, the deterrence. It wouldn't necessarily even require that every day they have to walk through a metal detector, but when they don't know whether the metal detector is going to be used that day, that's the deterrent factor, I think, that could really help.
And so, Jonathan, initial blush, you're married to married to a teacher, metal detectors in schools, yes or no?
Personally, I think it's kind of the same issue as the bump stocks. You can 3D print a plastic gun, and it's just as effective. And it might deter them initially. It might deter some the ease of access. And there's the argument, if it saves one, isn't it worth it? But I think it might cause more issue than it's worth. But definitely an idea that's been presented.
It's the PR issue, because a lot of suburban schools don't like the idea of having a metal detector because it sends a signal that, well, is this a dangerous school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes we have to recognize that may be a way to get some safety. I don't know.
But a simple, single point of entry would have stopped like this particular case, because he wasn't even supposed to be on the school grounds. Yeah. So, he wasn't ever going to walk in there with guns, if he was an actual student. And so it's hard. It's like there are simpler things that we can do without massive legislature.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Well, let's keep on going. We've got Nathan in Ohio right now. Nathan, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Hey, Nathan, what's your point of view?
Well, I've got two points of view. The first having to do with putting people in place in our schools. There are thousands of veterans that are not currently working, and we always say, well, we need to find them work. We have retired police officers. These people would love to protect our children.
Yes.
I mean, put a couple of them in the schools, give them training every single year, like you would continuing education for a teacher or anybody who has a degree of some sort that has to have continuing education. Give that to them to equip them for our schools. And then the second point, the young man in Florida, I mean, I know everyone's going to go to the gun, but that's not the why. We need to find out why when he went through all this. That kid was screaming for help. If you talk to any teacher, any past teacher, the interviews they had with the children, they knew who it was. They knew, they weren't surprised. Why did the system fail this young man? He was crying out for help for so long. Why is no one talking about the why? They're all worried about what he did after the why. They didn't find out why he actually went through and killed all these people, how he got to that point, and why someone didn't intervene.
Yeah, 39 visits to the home. Doesn't that say, whoop, 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 danger, danger. We need to do something, don't you think?
Yeah, not only did that, but I mean, it kind of goes back to your point, Jonathan, that there was a code red that was issued even when they saw him on the campus, but they just weren't able to react as quickly as they needed to. And so there's just an extent that we know that there's an issue with this individual. We know that there's issues that wasn't just happened a couple of days. I mean, the FBI was even alerted to this, and yet nothing was done. And so there needs to be systems. But I loved his idea, though, about putting veterans.
Yes,
what
me
a
too.
great idea.
And what great role models.
Yeah.
Don't you
I think the hard part, to play devil's advocate, I think it's an incredible idea because not only does it, provide jobs, but it also provides better security. The argument that you're going to hear back from that, though, is that you're militarizing our schools. And so, I mean, that's big, and I've heard a lot of people suggest, similar things. And it's just, there's so many things that could really help. And you just have to find that balance. Like, for example, background checks, where does HIPAA law comply with, where does that line draw? Because if you put somebody's mental health on an application, you're violating HIPAA laws, and so there's, and with the veterans, there's just so many different arguments involved. It's like, where's that balance of, I don't know, security and privacy rights?
Yeah. Bring up a great point. Okay, let's keep on going. We've got Bob in New Hampshire right now. Bob, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'd like to make a point here. I have been a mental health patient since I was 20. I'm now 59. And I can categorically deny that most mental health patients are dangerous. A few are, but most of them aren't.
You there, Bob?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, there you are.
Yeah. What I'm saying is a few mental health patients are dangerous, but most of them aren't. Right. I am a mental health patient, and well, I was diagnosed at the age of 20. I'm now 59, so I think I have something to say.
And there have been some people that lately have been even asking to come on this program that want to say, well, we don't want to vilify everybody in the mental health area and say that anybody who's got mental health issues is a danger to others. Oftentimes, they're danger to themselves. In other words, suicide is more likely. So I understand that. But you also recognize, let's use again our young man there in Florida that was the assassin killing all these individuals. He was obviously having some very significant mental issues. So, again, you don't want to paint with a broad brush. And I think, again, Jonathan's brought up a good point. The HIPAA laws were implemented for a good idea and a good reason, but they prevent us from doing some things that might actually save lives. So that may be a conversation that Congress should have in the future to say, on the one hand, we certainly want to protect people's privacy, but on the other hand, how much do we protect people's privacy and don't understand the impact that could have on public safety? So those are conversations that certainly Congress needs to have.
And again, that's operating underneath the assumption that we have privacy now in this digital age, right? I think,
yesterday we learned that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and so I think there are a variety of other data points that we might be able to pull from in order to better understand. Again, not all, I think you bring up a great point, not all mental health patients are dangerous.
Yes.
But we do need to understand that there's a sense that we've got to move on this.
One of the other points I want to put on the table, and let's give Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, we all know who he is.
Hey.
He actually put together a bill a number of years ago, and it went nowhere in the Congress. Maybe it will this time, which would actually increase penalties for felons and other individuals trying to buy guns. And it turns out that the last statistics he gave to us here, where there were 48,000 felons and fugitives who actually lied on the form to fill out, and we only prosecuted 44 of them.
Wow.
Prosecuted 44 out of 48,000. Again, that maybe wouldn't affect school shootings, but it would affect the carnage in the streets right now.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have fugitives and felons and people who are here illegally and they have an opportunity to get a gun by lying about it, and then we don't have criminal penalties, that's a bill in Congress that I think needs to be considered too.
Completely agree. And so we're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking about guns and some of the opportunities and solutions that will offer. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over onto the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. I see you there, Rick. Your comment is right there, and we're going to get to it right after this break. So be sure to tune in, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On our last episode, we discussed the religious test clause found in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Today, I'd like to discuss the clause just before it, the Oaths Clause. In practical terms, the Oaths Clause required federal officials to be bound to their office with an oath or affirmation that they would support the Constitution. Most immediately, that language came in stark contrast to the oath the new Americans once swore to England's king. No longer would Americans swear allegiance to a single human. Rather, their duty in office would be in service and support of the Constitution and, by extension, to the "we the people" mentioned in its preamble. You probably understand the part about oaths, but why did the framers insert the "or affirmation" part? Well, the answer reveals our country's commitment to recognizing that its government should neither compel nor compromise the religious conscience of its citizens. Some religious beliefs prevent the taking of oaths of any kind, save an oath to God alone. It may seem insignificant upon first glance, but by inserting the word "or" in the Oaths Clause and giving the option to affirm support of the Constitution, the framers made the official policy of the United States that it would show deference to the religious conscience of its citizens. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by Kirby Anderson and Jonathan Bodnar. We've been talking about gun control and the roles and responsibilities that we might be able to take to try to eliminate some of these school shootings. And we've been taking some of your phone calls, 800-351-1212. Been also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And one of those comments was Rick, and he said the only spiritual thing that will change these mass shootings is Christian revival.
Yes.
And the only physical thing that will end these mass shootings is armed police or staff on campus. Yes and amen, Rick, relative to the revival. There is just a great need for individuals to understand that they are known, they are valued, they are loved, and they are safe in the hands of the Father, and how much that's necessary and how good that is. Because as we know, religion produces virtue. And virtue is just a very good ally to limited government. And then armed police or staff on campus is, again, something that we're hearing. I can't help but think there's so many armed personnel in our malls. There's so many armed personnel, and even in theaters now. And now we consider children our most precious asset here in the U.S. Why don't we have armed guards, more armed guards, I should say, at some of these schools? I think it's something worth considering. And then, Kirby, you've also got one as well.
I've got one. You can not only leave it on Facebook, but also we have an inbox there. And Ray says, here's a subject I've not heard much about. And to be fair, we did talk about it a little bit yesterday, but I know people are tuning in and tuning all the time. And that is, what role, if any, does psychiatric or psychotropic drugs have in some of these situations? Because, for example, we remember Eric Harris, the Columbine shooter, was on some of these psychotropic drugs. Adam Lanza at Sandy Hook, James Home, the one in Aurora, Colorado. You go through a couple of others. There's one in Norway. Even James Hinckley, the one that shot President Reagan, or tried to assassinate him, was taking at least a drug. And so I think that's another issue. Does that mean that in every case that's an explanation? No. But I think, as we've already heard, Nick and Jonathan, it's really not one size fits all. Mm-hmm. There are different explanations, but I do believe that some of these very powerful psychiatric drugs, we had this debate even last Friday, did the drugs produce the behavior, or did the behavior require the drugs? So I'm not going to try to get into the chicken and egg situation, but nevertheless, it is something else to look at and to consider. And if an individual is showing bizarre behavior, this is where, again, people can make a difference. You've heard when we talk about terrorism, see something, say something. How many times did we see something and not do something? Mm-hmm. And again, if I can give a shout out to David French, he wrote a piece a while back in which he spent some time talking about how, again, people that saw something in San Bernardino, some people that saw something in Orlando, obviously people who saw something here in Parkland, Florida, if they had said something more, maybe that would have made a difference. So again, it's just a reminder that there are all sorts of possible explanations for why we have such a remarkable increase in the number of shootings and what we can do to try to stem those.
Completely agree. Let's keep on going to some of the phone calls. We've got Denny in North Carolina right now. Denny, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, what is your point of view, Denny?
Hi. I just thought the idea of using retired veterans was a wonderful idea. My thought was we've all been to Disney in Florida. It's a very safe place, and they use retired veterans in Disney outfits, in the hotels, and all over the grounds for security. And I think to use retired veterans and different people in the police force that are retired to keep our schools safe is a wonderful, wonderful idea. That's just my comment.
Hey, Denny, I appreciate your comment, not only because you called in, but two, because you agreed with me. I think that's just a wonderful idea, of just this opportunity to be able to allow our vets, because they've already got that training, so it's going to, obviously there's some nuance in that, but really just an opportunity to be able, and just think about the role models, these individuals. One of the increasing themes I can continue to go back to is we know what our rights are, but what is our duty to our country? And these are individuals that were willing to sacrifice for the sake of our country. We're willing to answer the call of duty. What not better role models to put on the front lines of some of our, in some of our schools and the formative places where this new generation is kind of being molded. And so we'll continue moving forward. We got Tom in South Carolina now. Tom, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Tom, what's your point of view?
Well, I won't disagree with the gentleman who said that metal detectors in the school could give the idea that the schools could be an unsafe place. I think with the number of school shootings that we've had in the last 20 years, that it's already out there that the schools could be a dangerous place. That's basically what some of the student protesters are saying.
And as long as they go along with it, I think that'd work. And again, I just hope that they would.
Metal detectors or some, security there would send the message that at least on the other side of them, it's as safe as it can possibly be. Mm-hmm. So, banning guns is only going to affect law-abiding citizens like myself, who is a gun collector. It's not going to keep the guns out the hands of deranged people, or criminals or anything,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, but I think it's high time that we have some sort of security in our schools. It's not the answer, but it will go a long way at stemming some of these ever-increasing school shooting rampages.
Yeah, Tom, I think you got a good point in the sense that, you know what, there's one perspective that we can just throw our hands up in the air and just say, this is human nature, it's bound to happen. Well, that's an apathetic point that, especially for Christians, we should never take. That there are certain measures that we can take that can help us stem the evil that kind of pervades our culture today. I mean, we think about people are always going to drink, right? That's just natural proclivity. But what we've done is we've decided to set laws in place in order to hinder people, to help them know that there's a punishment if they're to drink and do other activities. And this is just one of those situations, right, Kirby, that we can take these things to do something.
Do something about them. And again, as he points out, metal detectors, you don't see a lot of shootings in airports. You don't see a lot of shootings in courtrooms because we have metal detectors. You also don't see a lot of shootings. Matter of fact, I can't think of one at a gun show or at a gun shop or at a rifle range, because you know that there is just built-in deterrence in some of those areas. You've never seen anybody try to rob somebody at a police station. So let's just think through what deterrence does. There are certain places where people are not going to bring their guns and start unloading them on the citizenry, and that's because of deterrence.
That's so true. Okay, and last phone call, we'll take John in Texas. John, you there?
I'm here.
Hey, John, what's your point of view?
Well, first of all, if any of this agrees with what you say, Nick, it's strictly accidental.
Oh, that's great. So what's your point of view?
But there isn't one solution that will fit every school in the country, and I think it needs to go back to the individual school districts and let them make the decision, because I agree that the metal detectors, if they get upset with those around, they might as well accept it because they're around everywhere you go.
Yes.
And the other thing, all of this is really not addressing the problem, and the problem is the kids that are stepping off of the plantation, or not the plantation, that are going off and doing the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
40 years ago, kids carried guns to schools in their cars, and no one was shot. So something's happened, and it's the kids is what they're living in cesspools and they're being desensitized to death through abortion and the videos and the movies that are on and the songs that are on played. It's just death is just like walking out down the street. To me, that's the problem. That's what needs to be addressed. Or you can put all the security you want in the schools, and something's going to happen again.
Yeah.
It won't be with a gun. It'll be with something else.
Well, John, thank you so much for your phone call. And you all, thank you so much for listening. This has been Point of View. And so thank you. And you can go over to the website to get an archived version of this, pointofview.net or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll see you next time.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support